The Georgia sun was already heavy at 8 a.m., casting thick beams of light over rust-colored roads and patches of brittle grass. Along the quiet outskirts of Millersville, a pickup truck crawled to a stop on the shoulder of Highway 19. Its hood was propped open like a tired yawn, steam hissing into the air. On the ground beside it knelt Marcus Lane, 37 years old, a former Army mechanic who now lived a life far from military bases and command calls. His hands, still rough from years of service, moved with calm precision as he adjusted the corroded wiring beneath the hood. His faded T-shirt clung to his back in the heat, and grease marked both his forearms and the bridge of his nose. A few yards away, his 6-year-old daughter, Naomi, sat quietly in the backseat of their dusty sedan, swinging her legs and sipping orange juice through a bent straw. She watched her father with wide-eyed admiration, like he was building the world from scratch. From across the road, a neighbor's voice sliced through the calm. "Fixing some old stranger's truck again, Lane? You ever gonna fix that sagging roof of yours?" Marcus didn't turn. He didn't respond. He simply wiped the sweat from his brow and tightened the last bolt. The truck sputtered, then roared to life. The man beside the truck, older with silver hair and a muddy jacket, gave a small nod. He hadn't said much since Marcus pulled over. No desperate waving, no call for help, just a silent presence that somehow didn't feel like a man stranded by chance. "Name's Marcus," he finally offered, handing back a wrench. The older man didn't return the gesture. He only said, "You didn't ask who I was." Marcus shrugged. "Didn't matter. You needed help." As the stranger drove away into the dust, Marcus walked back to his daughter, who asked with a grin, "Daddy, was that man a superhero?" He chuckled and shook his head. "No, baby. Just someone with car trouble." But deep down, something about the encounter lingered. Something quiet, watchful. Back home, the old house creaked under its age, shingles missing, steps groaning. But it was home. And that night, as Naomi drifted to sleep under a patchwork blanket, Marcus sat on the porch with a chipped coffee mug, staring out into the night and wondering why that man had looked at him like he already knew him. He had no idea that by morning, his world would change with the sound of 3 black SUVs rolling up his gravel driveway. The morning sun crept slowly across the wooden floorboards of Marcus Lane's modest home. The heater hissed inconsistently in the corner, and the smell of instant coffee filled the kitchen. Marcus stood barefoot in a faded T-shirt and jeans, slicing an overripe banana into Naomi's cereal bowl while she chattered happily about a dinosaur book they'd read the night before. He smiled, half listening, half wrestling with a stack of unpaid bills tucked into a napkin holder. The roof still leaked when it rained. The fridge hummed unevenly, and the old sedan out front had started making a noise he didn't like. But they were getting by. Barely. Quietly. Honestly. Then came the sound. A low rumble. Not thunder. Not farm equipment. Engines. Multiple. Heavy. Controlled. Marcus froze, knife in midair. Naomi stopped talking, eyes wide. Then came the tires, crunching slow across gravel. He stepped to the window and pulled back the curtain. His hand tightened on the fabric. 3 black SUVs, parked in a perfect line at the end of his driveway. Clean. Government plates. Tinted windows. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. "Daddy, who are they?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the front door, the dish towel still slung over his shoulder, and opened it slowly. The morning air was thick with tension. The yard was quiet, save for the distant buzz of cicadas. Plastic toys were scattered across the lawn, and the porch light still blinked from a faulty wire. From the center SUV, a tall man in plain clothes stepped out. Silver-haired. Impeccably calm. Flanked by 2 younger agents who scanned the area without a word. He approached the porch with quiet authority, stopping just short of the steps. "Mr. Marcus Lane?" the man asked. Marcus gave a slow nod, every instinct from his service years suddenly awake. "My name is Colonel Jacob Whitman, U.S. Veteran Outreach Division. Yesterday, you assisted someone on the highway." Marcus blinked. "Didn't know he was anyone special," he said slowly. Whitman nodded. "That's exactly why we're here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder. Inside, credentials, a badge, and a letter. "You helped General Nathaniel Caldwell, retired commander of Joint Ops, without asking a single question. No names. No reward expected." Behind Whitman, the SUV door opened, and out stepped the same quiet man from the day before. But today, he wasn't in a muddy jacket. He wore a pressed blazer, clean boots, and a calmness that radiated command. "Mr. Lane," Caldwell said, voice firm. "Yesterday, you knelt in the dirt to help me without hesitation. That told me everything I needed to know." Marcus stood stunned. Caldwell climbed the porch steps slowly and extended a hand. "May we come in?" Underscore 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 underscore. Inside, Naomi peeked shyly from the hallway as her father sat at the kitchen table. The colonel and the general seated across from him like it was a military debriefing. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a kitchen with flickering lights, a broken cabinet hinge, and mismatched mugs drying in the sink. Whitman slid the letter toward him. "We're starting a new initiative. A national pilot program built for veterans like you. Men who served and never stopped serving. You've been selected, not by your resume, but by your character." Marcus didn't reach for the letter. He just stared, jaw tight, as the quiet weight of the moment settled around him. His daughter, his debts, his worn hands, and now, an offer, sudden, surreal, and still unspoken. The envelope sat on the table like a question Marcus didn't know how to answer. It wasn't heavy, but somehow it carried the weight of everything he had tried to hold together since leaving the army. Fatherhood, grief, bills, repairs, quiet breakfasts, bedtime stories, and the brokenness he never let his daughters see. Across from him, General Caldwell rested his elbows on the kitchen table, firm, composed, but not forceful. "This isn't charity," he said quietly. "It's recognition. Of who you are. Of what you still carry." Marcus glanced toward the hallway. Naomi was in her room, humming to herself as she dressed her dolls. She was his whole world. Every greasy repair job, every skipped meal, every night spent staring at overdue notices, it was always for her. "I haven't worn a uniform in years," Marcus finally said, voice low. "I haven't touched a manual since Afghanistan. Most days I'm under a tractor or hauling pallets of seed. I'm not qualified." Colonel Whitman leaned forward. "You're more qualified than half the resumes that land on my desk. This isn't about degrees. It's about grit. About people who still do the right thing, even when no one's watching." Marcus looked at his hands. Scarred. Strong. But tired. "So what is this, really?" he asked. "What am I being asked to do?" Caldwell answered. "We're launching the Veteran Infrastructure Corps, a program built to employ skilled veterans in rebuilding critical systems, bridges, power grids, emergency vehicles, flood response. You'll be trained, equipped, and positioned to lead. This country's backbone is cracking, and we need people like you to help fix it." He tapped the envelope gently. "Inside is a full offer. A stable salary, triple what you're earning now. Healthcare, housing assistance, a scholarship fund for Naomi when she's older. Placement here in Georgia. You won't have to leave your daughter behind." Marcus didn't touch the envelope. Not yet. His mind raced through memories. Melissa's laugh in the hospital room, even with tubes in her arms. The night he sat on the floor crying into his shirt sleeve because the roof leaked and he couldn't afford groceries. Naomi's tiny voice asking, "Are we still okay, Daddy?" And then yesterday, kneeling in the dirt beside a stranger's truck, grease on his face. No questions asked. It had felt like nothing. But now it was everything. "Why me?" he asked softly. "Why out of everyone you've met?" Caldwell's eyes held his. "I've staged 14 roadside breakdowns across 5 states this year. You were the first person who stopped without hesitation. No badge. No uniform. Just a man who still lives by a code." There was silence. Then, a whisper from down the hallway, "Daddy? I'm done with breakfast." Marcus stood. Nodded once. "Give me a moment," he said, stepping into Naomi's room. She looked up at him, her braids messy, her eyes bright. "Were those soldiers?" she asked. "Are they mad?" He smiled gently. "No, baby. They're here because we helped someone. And now, they want to help us." She nodded solemnly, like a tiny adult. "Is it a good thing?" He bent down and kissed her forehead. "It might be the best thing that's happened in a long time." When he returned to the kitchen, he sat down, looked both men in the eye, and finally picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it. When do I start? Caldwell smiled, not wide, not triumphant. Just the quiet smile of a man who saw the future taking shape. Training begins in 3 weeks. In Atlanta. You'll be home every weekend. Marcus exhaled slowly, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He shook Caldwell's hand, firm, grounded. Then Whitman's, efficient, respectful. And as the black SUVs rolled away, Marcus stood on his porch, Naomi by his side, holding his hand. Where are they going? She asked. To help someone else, he said. Like we did. And for the first time in years, Marcus Lane didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he was building something. 3 weeks later, Marcus Lane stood outside a large brick building in Atlanta with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and his toolbox in hand. It wasn't a military base, but it felt close, clean sidewalks, structured schedules, and the sound of boots on tile. The entrance read, Veteran Infrastructure Corps Training Center. Inside were dozens of men and women just like him, some older, some younger, all with stories written on their faces. Scarred hands. Steady eyes. The quiet kind of people who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. The first few days were overwhelming. The systems had changed. Technology had advanced. There were new codes to memorize, new protocols to follow. Marcus hadn't taken notes since the Army, and even then, most of his skills were learned by doing, not reading. But his hands still remembered. He could still hear the clink of socket wrenches, the hum of misaligned pistons. And slowly, quietly, he found his rhythm again. He stayed late to help others. Answered questions no one else had. And when a younger recruit froze during a wiring drill, Marcus knelt beside him, guiding his hands without judgment. We don't all get it on the first try, he said. But we get there. Together. By the end of the 3rd week, the instructors weren't just taking note of his skills, they were seeking his input. Leadership potential, one supervisor called it. But Marcus didn't care about titles. He cared about building something that lasted. Back home, the changes were subtle but real. Naomi had transferred to a better school, thanks to the new housing allowance. Their rental house didn't leak. The heater worked. There was a tiny backyard where Marcus had built her a sandbox with leftover lumber from the training site. They still had pancake breakfast on Saturdays. Still read bedtime stories. But now, there was a steadiness beneath it all. Not wealth. Not ease. But dignity. And the neighbors, those who once watched Marcus with vague pity or polite indifference, began to see him differently. One afternoon, Mr. Evans down the street knocked on his door. My water heater's gone cold. You mind taking a look? Marcus smiled. Of course. He didn't charge. He didn't make it a big deal. Helping was still who he was. Word began to spread. About the program. About the change. About the man who used to fix tractors and now coordinated with state engineers on infrastructure upgrades. Then came the request from Washington. A congressional committee was reviewing the Veteran Infrastructure Corps pilot. They wanted someone to speak, not an official, not a general, but someone who had lived the transformation. Marcus said no at first. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But then Naomi, always watching, always learning, asked one question. Daddy, if your story helps other kids get a better home like ours, wouldn't that be helping too? So he went. He wore a gray suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. He spoke softly, clearly, honestly. I didn't fix that truck to get noticed. I fixed it because I saw someone who needed help. That's all. That's enough. The room was silent. Not in apathy, but in awe. Marcus Lane had once felt invisible. But now, his quiet kindness was echoing through the halls of Congress. And when he returned home, Naomi ran into his arms like nothing had changed. Because for her, he'd always been a hero. Only now, the world had finally caught up. 6 months passed. The headlines moved on. New programs launched. More veterans found purpose again through the Infrastructure Corps. But Marcus Lane never sought the spotlight. He returned home to Georgia, to Naomi, to the house with the working heater and the backyard sandbox. He still packed her lunch every morning. Still checked homework by porch light. Still fixed leaky pipes around the neighborhood, never asking for payment. But something had shifted, not just in Marcus, but around him. People looked him in the eye now. The same neighbors who once judged his worn-out boots now waved first. Local contractors called to ask for his advice. A technical college asked if he'd consider teaching a hands-on workshop. He agreed, only if he could bring Naomi on weekends. At the center of his modest home, in a small wooden frame on the wall, hung a simple photograph. It wasn't from his army days, or the day he spoke in Washington. It was a picture Naomi had drawn. Crayon strokes on notebook paper. A man with grease on his hands, a little girl holding one, and a bright yellow sun above them both. She had written at the bottom, "My daddy fixes everything." That was the legacy. Not medals or handshakes from generals. Not televised hearings or national programs. But a child who felt safe. A neighborhood that had changed. A country that had remembered what service really means. Because Marcus Lane had proven something quietly, steadily, without needing applause. That doing good, really doing good, doesn't come from power. It comes from character. Helping a stranger on the side of the road led to a movement. But Marcus never saw it that way. To him, it was still simple. You fix what's broken. You help where you can. And you teach your kids to do the same. Some heroes wear suits. Others wear boots stained with oil and time. But the truest heroes? They keep showing up long after the world stops watching.